525 BC, the heavily fortified gates of Pelusium. A massive line of Egyptian archers stands ready, bows drawn taut, with the advancing Persian vanguard stepping perfectly into their kill zone. But the archers are sweating, trembling, and refusing to let their arrows fly. A single coordinated volley would shred the enemy charge and end the assault right then and there. Instead, the defenders stand entirely frozen, gripped by a physical paralysis at the sight moving toward them. The Persian front line advances behind a squirming, mewing wall of living house cats, hoisting the animals up in place of traditional wood or bronze shields. How exactly did the ancient world's most disciplined archers end up neutralized by a barricade of household pets? And how did this bizarre standoff lead to the unilateral slaughter of 50,000 Egyptian soldiers? This confrontation exposes a vulnerability in warfare. An empire's military defense collapses the moment an opponent learns to weaponize its deepest spiritual devotion. To understand this massacre, we have to look back at the diplomatic vacuum that triggered it. The conflict started with a calculated insult from the Egyptian pharaoh, Amasis II, directed at the Persian emperor, Cambyses II. Amasis had formally promised his own daughter in marriage to the Persian emperor to secure a political alliance. But instead of honoring the deal, he quietly swapped her out, sending a decoy woman to take her place in the royal court. When Cambyses discovered the royal impostor, his reaction was absolute fury. He immediately mobilized the entire Persian war machine, aiming it straight at Egypt to exact a brutal punishment. But Amasis died right before the invasion arrived. He left his untested son, Psammetichus III, to inherit the throne exactly as the Persian forces appeared on the horizon. A single act of diplomatic arrogance created a devastating geopolitical domino effect, dropping the crushing weight of an angry empire onto an unprepared heir. Before the Persians could even strike Egypt, they had to survive its first natural defense, the hostile, waterless expanse of the Sinai Peninsula. Cambyses found his solution through a highly influential Greek defector named Phanes. Phanes knew the terrain and managed to broker critical logistical alliances with local Arab tribes. These tribal allies established continuous supply chains of waterskins, keeping a sprawling army hydrated as they marched right up to the fortified gates of Pelusium. Successfully crossing the Sinai established Cambyses as a calculating tactician who systematically neutralized environmental barriers through precise logistics and local diplomacy. Pelusium was the fortified doorway into Egypt. Cambyses realized a traditional siege there would be slow and costly, so he searched for a cultural vulnerability instead. He found it in Egyptian theocratic law. The society practiced absolute veneration of felines, worshipping them as the living, breathing avatars of Bastet, the goddess of the home. The stakes for this religious devotion were absolute. Accidentally harming one of these sacred creatures was a crime against the state, strictly punishable by immediate execution. Cambyses weaponized this law. First, he ordered his vanguard infantry to paint the sacred image of Bastet directly onto their large protective shields. Then came the final, cruelest element of his plan. The Persians rounded up thousands of local stray cats, dogs, and sacred ibis birds, herding them directly in front of the advancing infantry lines. He took an uncompromising religious mandate and reverse-engineered it into a paralyzing tactical trap, shifting the conflict from physical warfare into pure psychological torture. Which brings us back to the towering walls of Pelusium, right as this psychological warfare hits its terrifying peak. The Persians escalated the assault, physically grabbing live cats and hurling them over the fortress ramparts directly into the ranks of the Egyptian defenders. The Egyptians were broken by a dual paralyzing fear. They faced the spiritual terror of divine retribution, compounded by the mortal threat of being executed by their own government if their arrows struck a falling cat. The defense lines shattered. Rather than risk the eternal and legal consequences, archers and heavily armed infantry simply dropped their weapons and abandoned their posts. This chart shows the grim result of that collapse. The battlefield turned into a one-sided massacre. When the dust settled, the Egyptian military suffered a catastrophic 50,000 dead, and the Persian forces? They lost just 7,000 men taking the fortified doorway to the nation. The capture of Pelusium demonstrated that an army can be dismantled without superior weaponry, provided the strike targets the enemy's foundational belief system. But history leaves us with a lingering mystery. The casualty numbers come from the historian Cambyses, but the specific story of the feline shield wall originates with the Macedonian strategist Polyaenus centuries later. And here is the catch. The ancient historian Herodotus documented this entire Persian campaign in massive detail, right down to the thickness of the skulls on the battlefield. Yet he completely omitted any mention of flying cats. So did this bizarre standoff actually happen? Or is the Battle of Pelusium simply the most effective piece of military propaganda ever invented to humiliate a conquered people? Fact or myth? The story endures because it forces us to ask what deeply held, modern beliefs could be weaponized against us today. Let me know what you think really happened.